Can you believe it? We did it! We did a whole study on the Trinity. Maybe you didn't think you could tackle a topic like this, but I'm so glad you stuck with it, and I bet you've grown so much. Think of all the things we've done in the past 6 weeks. We prayer walked, we learned a chunk of scripture, we responded to what we learned with our weekly challenges, we read the Bible, we looked up a lot of passages of scripture, we learned some new theological terms, and we studied the deep things of God in a way that opened up new layers of love for Him. So for the last time in this study, let's go over the 3 foundations of the Trinity. Number 1, there is only one God. Number 2, there are 3 divine persons of the one true God. Number 3, the 3 persons are co-equal, co-eternal, and co-relational. Today I want to reflect not only on what we learned this past week, but I also want to zoom out on what we've learned throughout this whole study. The Trinity is the gospel. The glory of God shines brightest when the gospel is demonstrated through Christ's death and resurrection. But despite the spotlight being on Christ in that moment, our salvation and redemption would never have been attainable without all 3 distinct persons of God being involved in the process. Jesus saves, and He saves not only through His finished work on the cross, but in partnership with the initiating power of the Father and the sustaining power of the Spirit. The Father initiated all of this. It was His plan all along. Like we talked about this week, He created the world from a position of love and glory, and it seems like His purpose was to share His infinite happiness and joy with us. The overarching story that Scripture paints of the God who is outside of time is that this was always the plan. It wasn't a failed experiment. God's redemption of mankind was always plan A. I believe all of Scripture teaches that all of this was known and necessary and beautiful. Let me unpack each of those 3 things. First, I believe Scripture teaches that this was all known by God. It didn't catch Him off guard. Scripture reveals a God who is sovereign and omniscient and outside of time. Even just one of those things would tell us that this wasn't something He didn't see coming. But all 3 together really hammer home that He was intentional about redemption. Revelation 13:8 tells us the Lamb was slain and our names were written in His book even before the foundation of the world. Second, I believe Scripture teaches this was necessary. If man had never fallen, but had lived as perfect and flawless, we wouldn't need to be redeemed. In the story of redemption, we're not the perfect, flawless heroes. God is. The story of redemption reveals the truth of the situation. We're not God, and He is the one worthy of being praised. Since we aren't God, it's impossible for us to be perfect. We were created good, but not perfect. When God made us, it wasn't His goal to create equals. All created things are still less than God. Even the angels can fall, and many did. God created good but imperfect people, and perfection is the standard. I know the fall of mankind is a hard story for us to stomach because it's so personal and because of all the horrific fallout of the fall. But when I'm able to zoom out on it, I can see how it ushered in the opportunity for Him to rescue us. 1 Peter 1:18-20 says, "You were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but was made manifest in the last times for the sake of you." Third, I believe that Scripture teaches the story of the fall and of our redemption is beautiful. Not on its own, of course, not just the fall, but as it plays out in God's bigger story by making it all possible. We see this in Ephesians 1:4-6. It says, "He chose us in Him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before Him. In love, He predestined us for adoption to Himself as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of His will, to the praise of His glorious grace." To the praise of His glorious grace. Do you see what that all means? If the fall of man hadn't happened, certain aspects of God's character would never have had a canvas on which to be displayed. The entire universe would miss out on seeing things like how He pursues His enemies, how He forgives sinners, how He is moved to show us mercy and grace. It took time and it involved His own suffering and humiliation. I literally can't think of anything more lovely than for a holy God to plan to suffer so that he could redeem a people he hadn't even created yet, who were bound to need his total intervention on their behalf. That is so incredibly generous and loving. If it weren't for the fall, we would have missed out on seeing so much of who he is, and we would never be able to revel in the beauty of his redemption. And his redemption is a better story than our perfection ever would have been. It shows God as glorious. Through the whole process, we see more of who the three persons of the Trinity are as they work together in our creation, our redemption, our restoration. Just like all of us, God reveals who he is through what he does. And his work of creation, redemption, and restoration show how engaged he is in this relationship with us, his image bearers, his children. He created and redeemed you. You. Do you know what the word redeemed means? It means to buy back. He made you. Then, on top of that, he paid for you at his own great expense. He loves you. The story of redemption always reminds me of something that happened in my family. I'm the youngest of 6, and when I was a kid, my dad's mom made a bunch of stuffed animals for us. They were frogs, actually. These frogs filled with beans. They had buttons for eyes. They weren't cute or cuddly, but they were a labor of love. I'm sure my grandmother spent dozens of hours carefully cutting out and stitching them all together and filling them with beans and sewing on their button eyes. By that time in her life, she was old and frail with failing eyesight, but still she made these frogs for us, my sweet grandmother. At the time, my older siblings all went to the same private Christian school, and I wasn't old enough to be in school yet, but I remember going to their school's yard sale fundraiser with them one time. All the students were responsible for bringing items from home to sell at the fundraiser, and so, of course, these unsightly frogs made their way onto one of the tables. And do you know who came to the yard sale? My grandmother. And do you know that she opened up her purse and bought those frogs back? She made them, poured her heart into it, ugly and flawed as they were, and then she paid for them to buy them back. That is what God has done with each and every one of you. He made you, then he paid the ultimate price to buy you back. Death on a cross. Redemption shows how incredibly loving his plan is. We see his abundant kindness and his plan for restoration in the story of our redemption. I tried to find one of those frogs to show you today, but no one knows where they are, and that's not how God works. He doesn't just buy you back and toss you into the attic somewhere like an old memory. You were created and redeemed to be conformed to his image, to demonstrate his character to the world around you, to every person who crosses your path. We were created in the flesh, and we are recreated in the spirit. Whether you're 17 or 75, there is a call on your life to demonstrate God to the world around you. You have a unique sphere of influence, and you are uniquely gifted by the Spirit to fulfill your calling. And just like the Spirit empowered Jesus for ministry, he also empowers us. He will equip you to obey him. You don't have to muster the strength on your own. Ask him for help. Ask him to guide you. Ask him to give you words. Ask him to open the right doors widely and close the wrong doors tightly. Ask him to direct your steps and strengthen you for the journey. He stands ready to help you always. You are not in this alone. Philippians 2:13 says, "It is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure." He does the doing. When Paul wrote a letter to the Romans, he pointed to the message of Jesus as not only the means of our salvation, but also as the chief responsibility we carry as believers. And while some of us may be especially gifted at evangelism, we're all called to preach the gospel, even if we wouldn't consider ourselves good at it. But hopefully you want to do that. Hopefully it isn't dreadful to think about sharing the gospel. Sure, it might be scary, but that's an opportunity to let the fear of God drive instead of the fear of man. Let your delight and awe in him be the driving force in your conversations. God's love for us not only reveals how we should love, but it also compels us to love. God is outgoing in his love, and we should be too. And love doesn't keep the good news of the gospel to itself. It shares. even with people who are very different from us in every way, because that's what he did. In Scripture, we see Christ followers of a wide range of tribal, political, and socioeconomic backgrounds living together with Jesus and his kingdom as their focus. His disciples included a wealthy tax collector and a poor fisherman, men who worked for Rome and men who wanted to overthrow Rome. Jesus welcomed people like pagans, prostitutes, and lepers, people who were considered filthy and godless. And their eternities changed because of who he is, not who they were. These people are our eternal family members. We're not only inextricably joined with him, but with each other too. We are deeply involved with him and with each other on every level of kingdom life. Does your circle look like his circle? Have you extended his love to people who don't look like you or think like you? Just as God demonstrates his unity and diversity through the Trinity, we demonstrate his unity and diversity through the body, like we talked about this week. He's creating harmony, not homogeny, unity and diversity. I am so proud of you all and so grateful that I got to do this alongside you. Truly, I cried when I found out that I was going to get to write this study about the Trinity. I just love him, and I want everyone to know how amazing he is. So thank you for digging into that with me and for letting me share all the things I've learned through Scripture and through other people who are fascinated with the Trinity. I hope this will be a launching pad for you to dig deeper into the Word, to read all of it if you haven't, and if you have, to do it again and forever. Keep looking for him every day for the rest of your life because, say it with me, he's where the joy is.